The biggest mistake I made wasn't discovering my boss's secret. It was convincing myself that staying quiet was the safest choice. For months, I told myself I hadn't actually seen anything. I repeated that lie so many times. I almost believed it. Then one Monday morning, my boss didn't show up for work. By Friday, he'd resigned. His executive assistant was gone a week later. Nobody in the company would explain what happened, but I knew exactly when everything had started. It all began on the night of our company Christmas party. 5 years ago, I landed what I thought would be my forever job. It was a regional logistics company just outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy. We handled shipping for manufacturers across 3 states, about 200 employees, big enough to have departments, small enough that everyone recognized each other in the hallway. It wasn't one of those toxic workplaces you read about online. People actually stayed. Some had been there 15 or 20 years. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Our general manager, Mark, had been there the longest. If you asked anyone to describe him, you'd hear the same words every time. Reliable, patient, fair. He knew warehouse workers by name. He remembered birthdays. When someone's family member got sick, Mark was usually the first person organizing a collection to help. Pictures of his wife and 2 daughters covered an entire wall of his office. Every Monday morning, he'd tell us some story about coaching softball or helping his youngest daughter with homework. Nobody questioned the kind of man he was. Neither did I. Then Sarah joined the company. She became Mark's executive assistant. At first, nobody paid much attention. Companies hire assistants all the time, but within weeks, everyone realized she was different. She wasn't loud. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply incredibly good at her job. Meetings started on time. Schedules never conflicted. Problems somehow disappeared before they reached Mark's desk. She made everyone's job easier. Even people who barely spoke to her respected her. A few guys asked her out. She politely declined every one of them. Nobody thought much of it. She seemed focused on building her career. Honestly, if someone had asked me back then what I thought of Sarah, I would have said she was probably one of the most professional people in the building. Nothing more, nothing less. About a year later, I volunteered to help with a late inventory count. It wasn't unusual. Every few weeks, we'd stay until 8 or 9. That night, I walked out carrying a stack of reports. Only 2 cars remained in the parking lot, mine and Mark's SUV. I remember thinking, poor guy, he's probably still buried in emails. As I unlocked my truck, another set of headlights flashed behind me, Sarah's car. I hadn't even realized she was still inside. She pulled out of the parking lot. About 10 seconds later, Mark followed, not together, not side by side, just close enough that I noticed. I shrugged it off. If they worked late, of course they'd leave around the same time. There was nothing strange about that. Or at least, that's what I thought, until it happened again. 2 weeks later, same thing. Then again the following month. Always after everyone else had gone home, always the last 2 cars in the parking lot. I never saw them leave together. Never, just almost together. Each time I found another explanation. Quarterly reports, budget meetings, corporate conference calls. Every explanation sounded perfectly reasonable. So I stopped paying attention. At least I tried to. One evening, I forgot my laptop charger. It was almost 10 when I drove back. The warehouse lights were already off. Only the executive offices remained lit. As I walked through reception, I heard laughter. Quiet. Natural. Not the kind of forced laugh people use during meetings. It sounded personal. I looked toward Mark's office. The blinds were closed. Light spilled beneath the door. I couldn't see inside. I stood there for a second, then laughed at myself. You're seriously making up stories now? I grabbed my charger and walked back out. On the drive home, I actually felt embarrassed. There was seriously making up stories now? I grabbed my charger and walked back out. On the drive home, I actually felt embarrassed. There was no reason to assume anything. None. The company Christmas party arrived a few weeks later. It was held at the same downtown hotel every year. Employees brought their spouses. There was dinner, music, awards, an open bar. Mark arrived with his wife, Linda. She was exactly the woman everyone imagined. Warm, friendly, the type of person who thanked servers by name. Watching them together, they looked genuinely happy. Sarah spent most of the evening helping coordinate speeches and awards. Nothing unusual. She was working. Around 10:30, people began heading home. I should have done the same. Instead, I stayed for one last drink. That turned into 3, maybe 4. The next, someone from the hotel staff gently tapped my shoulder. "Sir, we need to lock up." I blinked at my phone. 11:41 p.m. Great, I apologized, grabbed my jacket, and headed toward the lobby. Halfway there, I remembered I'd left my laptop bag in one of the conference rooms our company had rented earlier that evening. I turned around. The hallway was almost empty. Most of the lights had already been dimmed. That's when I saw them, Mark and Sarah. Walking quietly toward the last conference room at the end of the hall, neither of them noticed me. Mark unlocked the door. Sarah stepped inside. He glanced once down the hallway, then followed her in. The door clicked shut. I frowned. Maybe they'd forgotten company equipment. Maybe they were discussing next year's budget. Maybe. I started walking away. It wasn't my business. It never had been. I reached the lobby, stopped, looked back down the empty hallway. The conference room light was still on. I checked my phone. 11:48. Forget it, Daniel. I sat down near the entrance to sober up before driving home. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 20. I don't know why I kept looking toward that hallway. I just did. At exactly 12:36, the conference room door finally opened. Sarah walked out first. She paused for a second in front of the dark window beside the door. Using the reflection, she adjusted a loose strand of hair. A few seconds later, Mark stepped out. He straightened his tie, looked both directions down the hallway. Then, without saying a word, he reached over and gently brushed something off Sarah's shoulder. Maybe it was dust. Maybe it was nothing. The gesture lasted less than a second. Sarah smiled. Not a big smile, just the kind of smile you don't usually see between a boss and his assistant. Neither of them noticed me sitting 50 feet away in the dark lobby. A moment later, they walked away in opposite directions. I stayed where I was, staring at the empty hallway, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing, because the truth was, I hadn't actually seen anything that proved they were having an affair. Just enough to make me wonder if I'd witnessed something I was never supposed to see. Prove they were having an affair. Just enough to make me wonder if I'd witnessed something I was never supposed to see. The following day, everything looked exactly the same. Mark walked through the warehouse like he always did. He joked with the shipping crew. He stopped to ask one of the forklift operators how his son's basketball tournament had gone over the weekend. Sarah handed out meeting agendas before our weekly management meeting. She smiled. She laughed. She looked exactly like she had every other Monday. If I'd never gone to that Christmas party, I would have believed nothing had happened. For the first few days, I almost convinced myself I had overreacted. Maybe brushing something off her shoulder didn't mean anything. Maybe they really had been discussing work. Maybe spending an hour together after the party had been unusual, but not inappropriate. The more I thought about it, the more embarrassed I felt. I started avoiding those thoughts altogether. Life moved on. January became February. February became March. Our busiest season arrived and everyone worked overtime. If there was anything going on between Mark and Sarah, they never gave anyone a reason to suspect it. Not once did I see them acting unprofessionally. No flirting, no private jokes during meetings, no unnecessary touching, nothing, which made me question myself even more. One afternoon, I was grabbing coffee in the break room when Mike from accounting walked in. Mike had been with the company almost as long as Mark. He wasn't a gossip. Actually, he usually stayed out of office drama. As he poured himself a cup of coffee, he casually said, "You ever notice Mark works a lot later these days?" I shrugged. "I guess." Mike nodded toward the executive offices. "He never used to." That was it. He changed the subject immediately. But those 7 words stayed in my head, because I had noticed. I just didn't want to admit it. About 2 months later, the company announced that Sarah had been promoted. She'd accepted a position at our corporate office in Cincinnati. It was a major promotion. Higher salary, better benefits, a bigger role. Nobody questioned it. She had earned a reputation as one of the most organized people in the company. During her farewell lunch, people lined up to shake her hand. I did too. "Congratulations," I said. "You'll do great." She smiled. "Thanks, Daniel. I'll miss everyone here." There wasn't a hint of nervousness in her voice. If she was hiding something, She was better at it than anyone I'd ever met. After that day, I never saw her again. For a while, I actually felt relieved. Whatever strange feeling I'd carried around for months slowly disappeared. Without Sarah in the office, everything returned to normal. Or so I thought. Nearly 4 months passed. Then one Monday morning, Mark didn't show up. That wasn't unusual. Managers traveled, corporate meetings happened all the time. Tuesday came. Still no Mark. Wednesday. His office remained dark. People started whispering. Someone said he was sick. Another person claimed he was helping open a new distribution center. Nobody actually knew. Thursday afternoon, an email arrived from Human Resources. It was only 4 sentences long. Mark had resigned. The company thanked him for his years of service and wished him the best in his future endeavors. That was it. No retirement party, no farewell speech, no announcement in the conference room. A man who had dedicated nearly 20 years to the company simply disappeared. The office felt different after that. People smiled less. Everyone seemed to be waiting for someone to explain what had happened. No explanation ever came. About a week later, I received a text from Mike. Lunch tomorrow? We met at a small diner a few miles from the office. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about work. Then Mike looked around to make sure nobody nearby was listening. You remember Sarah? I nodded. Of course. He stirred his coffee for several seconds before speaking again. My cousin works in corporate HR. I stayed quiet. I probably shouldn't tell you this. Whenever someone says that, you know they're going to tell you anyway. Mike lowered his voice. Mark's wife found out he'd been having an affair. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. He continued. Apparently, she'd suspected something for months. She hired a private investigator. They confronted each other privately. There wasn't some huge scene at work. No police, no screaming. Corporate found out after everything was already falling apart. According to Mike, Mark was given a choice: resign quietly or risk the situation becoming public inside the company. He resigned the next day. Sarah submitted her resignation from corporate less than 2 weeks later. Neither of them ever returned. I drove home that afternoon without turning on the radio. The entire drive, I kept replaying that night at the hotel, the empty hallway, the conference room, Sarah fixing her hair, Mark adjusting his tie, that brief touch on her shoulder. For months, I tried to convince myself those moments meant nothing. Now, I wasn't so sure. What bothered me most wasn't that I'd guessed the truth. It was how desperately I tried not to believe it. People sometimes ask why I never reported what I'd seen. The answer is simple. Reported what? That my boss and his assistant had been alone in a conference room? That he brushed something off her shoulder? That they left separately? None of that proved anything. If I'd gone to HR with nothing but suspicions, I wouldn't have protected anyone. I would have become the employee spreading rumors about 2 coworkers. And if I had been wrong, I could have destroyed 2 careers for nothing. The truth eventually came out on its own. Not because of me, not because of office gossip, because secrets like that rarely stay hidden forever. It's been several years since all of this happened. The company has a new general manager now. Most of the younger employees have never even heard Mark's name. Sarah is just another contact that disappeared from the company directory. Life moved on. It always does. But every December, when our company holds its Christmas party, I catch myself looking down the hallway toward the conference rooms. And for just a second, I remember that night. Not because I discovered an affair, but because I learned something I'll never forget. Sometimes the hardest decision isn't exposing someone else's secret. Sometimes it's accepting that not every mystery is yours to solve. And sometimes the truth has a way of revealing itself without anyone saying a single word.